2024, the Major John Leroy Haynes Florida Veterans History Program was created to collect and preserve the stories and experiences of Florida's veterans and to recognize the state of Florida's military contribution throughout our nation's history. Through recorded interviews, the Florida Veterans History Program Oral History Collection acts as a living archive of first-hand accounts to capture the details of military service and the voices, memories, and reflections of the Floridians who served. The Major John Leroy Haynes Florida Veterans History Program is operated by the Department of State, Division of Arts and Culture's Florida Folklife Program. Together, we are proud to ensure that Florida's military history is preserved, honored, and shared. My name is Julian Duncan with the Florida Department of State, Division of Arts and Culture, Florida Folklife Program. Today is August 4th, 2025. Time is 1:14 p.m., and I'm interviewing Joan Sullivan in the Villages, Florida. Also present is Zachary Morrow. This interview is being conducted for the Major John Leroy Haynes Florida Veterans History Program and will additionally be submitted to the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. So good afternoon, Ms. Sullivan.
Good afternoon.
Could you please start by telling us a little bit about where you were born and a little bit about your life growing up?
I was born on Long Island, New York, and I grew up on Long Island, about 30 miles from where I was born. A lot of my father's relatives had landed in the New York area when they came over from Ireland, as well did my mother. She was actually from Brooklyn. I had a brother and a sister that were younger than I, and we went to traditional Catholic schools and high schools, and then it was just expected that we would go to college, so we went to college. So I went to Georgetown, which was in Georgetown University, which is in Washington, D.C., and got a baccalaureate in nursing to begin with. And so then I went to University of Florida, go Gators, to get my master's in nursing. And from there I went to probably Tennessee because I was needing money, is what it was. If they'd paid me enough, I would have kept in school. That would be great for them. So I went to University of Tennessee and worked there. I taught in the College of Nursing, the baccalaureate program in nursing, and worked in a neonatal ICU, and then in an emergency room, and then a different emergency room. And then from there, while I was there, I joined I was commissioned as an officer in the reserves. And that happened because one of the people I was teaching with was also in the reserves, and she said, I think you'd fit in just fine. Why don't you come? They'll pay you to go camping and be great fun. You'll love it. So I thought, well, okay, that sounds like fun. And so at first it was supposed to be 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summertime. And at first that was what it was, but it didn't last that long after that. They changed it as their need became more obvious. And so we had a number of missions, primarily supporting units that did not have a medical aspect, section to them, either doing their physicals for some school or whatever, and also going with them to their ATs and taking care of any injuries or illnesses that were there. I was commissioned in 1977, probably before you were born. Hit him, so... I'm a pretty good aim. You're lucky I'm having a racer. Then from teaching at University of Tennessee and working on an outpatient or in a non-cerebral area or non-scholastic areas. So from there, I did join the reserves and I really liked what they were doing, but I was tired of always just doing medical stuff because I did that at work and I did that in the Guard. So I thought, well, maybe I can go to a non-medical unit and do something there. So in 1994, I switched to the National Guard, the New York Army National Guard. I think I skipped some things in there, but that's okay. And in the New York Army National Guard, I was initially commissioned as a surgeon and as an 04, but then somebody came along and said, Well, no, you have enough experience to be a major in the nurse corps, but you don't have enough experience to be a major in the medical corps. And I said, okay. So they demoted me to captain, and which was fine because I still outranked most of the members of my class that had gone through the USU scholarship program. So, and I was paid more too, paid better. And I could work as a nurse in the emergency room while we weren't in school or in clinical. So, so from Tennessee, then I went to, let's see, after Tennessee, I went to Cincinnati where I did residency. And again, I was in the National Guard at that point. And again, we were doing, it was a station hospital, so we were doing a lot of physicals and not a lot of things that we're going to be doing later on. And we had some missions that were non-combat missions, like we were deployed once we were back in New York for the crash of Flight 800, the TWA, which I think was in '96, if I think that's true.
I think I have that in my notes here.
Okay, yeah, I think it is. And it was right off the southern part of Long Island, off Shinnecock Bay, and there was a big Coast Guard station right in Shinnecock. So they were sort of the land leaders, and we just augmented them. And at first we thought it was going to be a recovery mission, and then meaning that we're going to find people alive. And then it became very apparent to the people that know that area of existence well that there was not going to be a soul that was alive after that crash. So, and then there were all sorts of rumors about what caused the crash. Somebody said, oh, they shot it down. Somebody said, oh, they had all sorts of rumors. And I think most of the guardsmen just figured, well, they'll figure out what it was. We're not flying anywhere, so we don't really care as much. And they were picking out pieces of the aircraft, both from land and sea, and bringing it to a hangar and putting it back together again to see if that would help them identify what had happened.
And you talked about, when we talked about this on the phone before, you talked about young soldiers and going along the beaches, picking up.
Right. There were a lot of the people in the Guard were kids to me. They were 18, 19, 20 years old that had never been in anything more serious than a scary movie. And here we're asking them to go out with one of the Coast Guardsmen and roam the beaches and pick up body parts, and it was very hard on them because that's not what they had. They thought they were just getting money to go to school, and that they would learn how to fire a weapon, and that would be the extent of their involvement in the Guard. But they did a great job. We had an imposter who came in Shinnecock, that area, and he was just walking along, and he had a camera with him. Cameras are always suspicious. Anyway, he was dressed in BDUs, in the fatigues, camouflage, but some really bright young guardsmen looked at him and said, "Ma'am, he's got the wrong uniform on." And I looked at him, and he did. He had his name tag and his rank and everything was in one corps, was the Army Corps, and then his, I think his branch was in the Air Force. So anyway, they detained him. The kid notified the MPs, and they detained him and found out that he was an imposter. He just wanted to come down and be a looky-loo and see what was going on. So I don't think he meant any harm, but...
Did he go and just buy a uniform from Name Surplus or something?
I don't know.
Do you know what happened to him?
Nope. No. He wasn't sick, ill, or injured, so we had enough of those other people to take care of. So,
what was your role on this mission as these soldiers are out picking up parts and taking parts of the plane back to the hangars? And what was your role?
The first role I had was actually, before we ever went out, was to try and identify the medical mishaps that they could get themselves into, what was the medical threat, and then to brief the commander of the unit and say, this is what we're likely to run up against. We've got kids with no life experience, and they're just going to be good pickings for a problem. So, and then after that, it was if anybody got ill or injured. We had one guy that was running, I think, an AK forklift, and he did something, hurt one of his parts. So, but there weren't a lot of injuries. More it was the emotional component of it, and because they were told you can't really talk about this because it could be an active crime scene, it could be a matter for national security, so you really can't talk about this. And they did a good job. They didn't talk about it. And then I would show up at different spots that they were working at, either on a boat with the guardsmen, with the Coast Guard, or walking along the beaches. They had some of those all-terrain vehicles that they were riding on that helped them cover more ground than they would have otherwise. So it was more like monitoring their mental health particularly. And some of them, it was in July, I think, and so it was hot, although it wasn't as hot as here, but it was hot. So just making sure that they maintained water discipline. But that's really sergeant's business. So that's what we put the sergeants in charge of, was making sure your guys are drinking enough and are not acting funny. So
that's interesting. So they had you do some psychological services, it sounds like.
Yeah, my master's was in psych mental health nursing, so I was able to use that. So, and that's one of the things about the Guard, is that you have a group of people that have a ton of different kinds of experience. You might have a banker and a portrait artist and a nurse and a doctor and a bank teller, and all in the same unit. And the command trick is to find out who knows what and can do what and can contribute what to the mission.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. It's really cool to see how people come together with different backgrounds.
And the other thing is, too, that a lot of them knew each other because they had been in the same unit for a while, or they were neighbors, or they went to school together, or they played football against each other, or so they had another connection, and that helped. The military, or at least the Army, had a system that they called Battle Buddy. Are you familiar with that? Okay. And that was really helpful. That was very helpful.
For just for cameras, can we talk about that a little bit?
Yep. The Battle Buddy system is recognizing that the soldiers were going to be at least potentially faced with a lot of emotionally charged situations, and situations they'd never been in front of before. Somebody came up with the bright idea that they should have a battle buddy, and your battle buddy was like your BFF here in the civilian world. It's your best friend, somebody you can tell anything to, and they're not going to go running off and blab it. It's going to be confidential between those two people, and they monitor each other, kind of watch each other, and make sure that they're getting up and getting shaved and dressed and not letting their appearance go, not showing up for things, making sure that the head count was always right. So it was a big help. We did that in Iraq and Afghanistan too.
Now, I'm curious about, you mentioned at this point you're living in Cincinnati and you're in the New York National Guard. Are you driving up for your drill?
Oh, no. I think I skipped a spot. I was in the reserves in Cincinnati for 4 years that I was there doing residency. And then I moved to New York. And at first I was in the reserves. And I think it was a station hospital. It was in Liverpool, New York. And then the military was deciding to kind of put most of the medical assets in the reserves, most of the infantry assets in, or for example, in the Guard. EOD went to Navy. So there were a lot of changes that were happening. I thought, I think I'll switch to the Guard. So I transferred to the Guard at that point. And that was in 1994. And so at first I was assigned to the 204th Combat Engineers. And that was great fun because they had all the big tonnage. They had sheep's foot and dozers. They had D7s and D8s. And they have just all the things that, big earth movers. And we got called for a lot of different events, like the storms that were out on Suffolk County. They had beaches that had been eroded and were endangering people that lived in the area. So the guys were really excited because they got to have stick time, which meant that they could operate that vehicle or that equipment. And that was really a lot more fun than being a bank teller, they decided. So
So what was the, I mean, you're doing a lot. You're doing, school and residency and working in medicine, and then also doing these emergency responses during this period, doing this mobilization to Guatemala during this period. All of this is still pre 9/11, right?
so far, yep.
So far. And just reflecting on that period of your life, how do you feel like the balance between the military career and the civilian career, education career, how did that balance work for you? Was that a challenging balance? Was it a fairly smooth transition between the two, back and forth between the two?
I think for me, it was not as much of a challenge, perhaps because when I was in med school, I was older than the average medical student, and I had to juggle things in my life prior to that too. So that was helpful, but it was challenging for some, and it was challenging for me at some times. And you just learn to prioritize which papers come in due first, and the medical school, when I interviewed for that, I was already in the reserves. And so when I went on interviews to med schools, I did tell them that that was something that I intended to continue. So they knew. And then when I came out of residency and looked for a job, the groups that I chose to work with, I told them too right up front. I said, I have no idea what this is going to entail tomorrow. I can tell you up till now it's been a weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summertime. And they said, yeah, we can get around it, because I joined a group that had 3 other physicians. So, and then we took on a 4th other physician, and then some left.
In what do you mean by group?
A group practice in Ithaca, New York, so that we had 4 or sometimes 5 OBGYNs in a group practice. And so we shared profits and we shared responsibilities, and we shared, like, on call, for example. And I never thought that we would be utilized as much as we were, and that I would need to be gone for as much as we were. But they said, oh, this is what we said we do. This is what we'll do. So they were very honorable about it. And they sent packages. And the patients, one of the patients came up to me and she said, now, Doc, you remember you delivered Susie, or whatever the little girl's name was, their first child? And I said, yep. And they said, and we'd love to have you deliver our next one. When are you going overseas again that you're not going to be available? So it was like they're going to plan their fertility cycle around my National Guard stuff. It's pretty funny.
Can you talk a little bit about the mobilizations overseas, Guatemala and others?
Guatemala happened almost immediately after I came to the reserves. And I was with the combat engineers, and the 204th Combat Engineers. They're headquartered in Binghamton, New York, which is in the southern tier. And the mission was called Nuevos Horizontes, or New Horizons. And what we were doing, or what everybody was doing that went over there, was to help, in order to help stabilize their economy, they were doing things like building schools, building clinics. That was the vertical platoons. And then the horizontal platoons were building roads, particularly up over the mountain, because over the mountain, every spring it rained so much it washed them out. So they just built bigger and better roads so that they could keep doing their marketing and their trading and all that business. So, and it was, we had quite a few people that were English, Spanish speakers, they were really helpful. Did I tell you about we had one soldier, we got on the plane and we're taking off. It's like, oh, dark 100. And we're taking off out of the Griffiths Air Force Base in the middle of New York State. And I had been up most of the night talking with soldiers. Can you go? Can you not go? And so I was tired, so I got on the plane and fell asleep. I didn't even know if they had wheels up yet or not. And so all of a sudden I feel this rocking, and they're like, Doc, Doc, somebody had better be bloody. And so I said, what? And they said, there's a guy back here having a seizure. And I thought, if this is a joke, you're a dead person. So anyway, I went back, and sure enough, the kid looked postictal. He looked like he had had a seizure. And so anyway, I said to one of the kids that was watching this, go up and ask the pilots where we are, because if we're closer to go back to Rome, we'll take them back there. But if we're closer to Mexico City or to Mexico, we can go there, or we can go to Guatemala, because Guatemala had a hospital. So he said, comes back and he says, the pilot wants to see you. And I'm thinking, this kid knows more about navigation than I do, but okay. So I went up, and he said, I said, where are we? And he gives me like an 8-point grid coordinate. And I said, all I want to know is Mickey's Foot closer to Griffiths Air Force Base, or is it closer to Guat City? They said, Guat City. I said, okay, get us there, but tell them they need to have an ambulance at the place where we're going to land. I'd never been there, so I didn't, and it really was not much more than a runway at that point. And they had an old, probably a 707 maybe. It was really an old plane. And somebody said, hey, look, you know how we have U.S., Air Force One? This is Guatemala only. And I was like, well, that's politically correct, but it was. So anyway, I had a medical student with me who was from Puerto Rico and was wonderfully bilingual. And so I said, Gil, you need to go with this guy to the emergency room so you can communicate what happened to him and what was new, and you can tell the poor soldier what's going to happen. And he says, okay. And then he says, ma'am? I said, yeah. He says, don't leave me here. I said, no, we're not going to leave you here. So anyway, the kid did okay. They sent him back through Panama, I think. Sent him back through Southcom somewhere. And he ended up, I think, in Walter Reed, and got diagnosed and treated. And so, but that was Guatemala had a hospital, and the radiology department, it was a closet that had a view box in it that you could throw an x-ray up on and look at it. And the hospital itself had one bed. It was pretty rudimentary at that point. It was a long time ago.
That raises, I'm curious about what kind of particular challenges you may have had in Guatemala as a medical professional. And I was thinking more along the lines initially of unique diseases or unique situations, but also the infrastructure as well. Along those lines, what was particular about your job in that setting?
Some of it was the same in terms of evaluating and monitoring, and some of it was just very different, and some of it was not so different, like a broken bone is a broken bone in Guatemala or in New York. But getting them taken care of was something different. And so for one person, I can't remember now which patient it was, but we were trying to get them evac'd to Gorgas over in Panama because they had what they needed. And one of the representatives, I don't know whether it was the ambassador or whoever it was not wanting to allow that to happen because they were in charge of it. They were the boss of that. And so I said, okay, then you need to sign on a piece of paper that you're not willing to do that. You're not willing to have them use U.S. assets to get that patient there. So she signed. We had one guy that they brought in on a stretcher, and the 4 kids that were carrying him on the stretcher were laughing hysterically. And so I said, what have you got here? And he said, we'll let him tell you, ma'am. So I said, So anyway, they put him down on the stretcher, and I said, why are you here? And he said, permission to speak freely, ma'am. I said, permission granted. I said, otherwise I'm never going to find out what's wrong with you. And so he said, okay, so I'm speaking freely. Can I just tell you that there I was, sitting on the latrine for the purposes of this conference. And all of a sudden, I was sitting down because I had to sit down. I said, okay. And he said, and all of a sudden, some blankety blankety blank scorpion fell down from the ceiling down through my legs. And so he said, so I did what any red-blooded American male would do. And I said, what's that? And he said, I got up and ran. And he said, but the problem was that I forgot my pants were down around my ankles, and I tripped over my pants, and I fell into the aluminum side wall of the latrine. And so he had a head injury that made a loud noise, and so somebody called the medics. So the medics came and got me, and I was telling them what the problem was, and they laughed so hard they dropped me. And so I said, okay. But anyway, it was fine. He turned out just fine. Everybody had a great laugh about it. And the funniest part was him telling his wife about it. And I said, so another important point is, where is said scorpion right now? He said, I don't know, ma'am. It's just not where I don't want it to be. And I said, okay. I'm thinking, why? So they had some interaction with the locals, but not a lot. And I didn't get a feeling while I was there, perhaps I wasn't astute enough to pick it up, whether they wanted us there or didn't want us there. Since we weren't having any combat activity, and they were getting some good roads out of it and some clinics and some schools. I presume that they were happy enough. The other funny thing about it is, I think I told you I did my residency in OBGYN. So I was sitting there one day talking to one of the soldiers, and the veterinarian comes up and he says, Doc, we need you. And I said, for what? And he says, well, we were on the old side of a Guatemalan military camp. And so he says, there's a patient over on the other side that is having trouble giving birth. And I said, tell me a little more. And they said, well, she's a pig. And I thought, that's terrible to call her that. But he said, no, I mean really like a oink oink pig. And I said, okay, and why do I need to go? I don't do pigs. And he said, I don't do deliveries. And so we managed to get through all that. We went over to the Guat side, the new side of camp, and there was Mamacita the pig, who was, she had 2 or 3 of her babies already, but the next one was transverse lie. It was lying sideways, and so she wasn't going to be able to push that baby out. That way you had to turn the baby. And so we turned the baby, and the baby came out, and the other 2 came out. But then Mamacita had a bad case of mastitis, so she wasn't wanting to feed the babies. And so we got some American Gatorade and fed them Gatorade out of American bottles. It was hilarious. And so, but then the sad part was Blackie, who is the littlest of, I think he's like 3rd or 4th of the pigs, and he got killed because one of the things that I guess is peculiar to pigs, although I didn't know it, but this is what the vet told me, was that after they deliver, their uterus inverts, like turns inside out, and they bleed. And so that happened to Mamacita. And so she got woozy and fell over on Blackie and squished Blackie. So Blackie gave his life to his mother.
Well, that's sad to hear.
Yeah, but it was a very interesting tour. I'll say that.
How long were you there?
Maybe 3 weeks, maybe less than a month.
Well, let's move forward a little bit. You are in the New York National Guard on 9/11.
The New York Army National Guard, right?
New York Army National.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And of course, 9/11 is a turning point for the entire country, and it's a shocking moment for the entire country.
It was.
But I think for, and maybe a similar experience with New York law enforcement and New York emergency response, being both a medical professional and member of the New York Army National Guard,
Mm-hmm.
you're in a very unique position on 9/11, and I'm going to make this one just very open. Can you just talk a little bit about that day and that experience and
Mm-hmm.
the weeks following?
It was on September 11th. And as a side note, all the professionals, all the bigwigs, the generals and their minions were over in Arkansas at the Professional Education Center, the PEC. And so they weren't home. So, and I was getting ready to go to a conference in Boston, and I was coming off call, and I was getting ready to do a little procedure, and then I was going to be off call. So I was waiting for them to get the baby ready, and so all of a sudden I hear, "Doc, come quick, come quick." And I thought, oh, rats, something's wrong with the baby. And so I go charging down the hall. This is on pediatrics. And they pull me into this room and the television's on. I'm like, what are you doing? So I looked up and they had the picture of, I guess it was the South Tower that was first hit. And it was smoke coming out of it. And I said, what happened? And they said a small private plane flew into it. And I looked and I said, and I'm not an aviator, but that's a pretty big hole for a small private plane. So we're standing there watching, deciding what to do. And we watched the second plane fly into the other tower. And I said, you guys, we're under attack and I need to go. And they said, well, can you do your procedure? Yep, I can do that. So I went home and we didn't have any ability to get to talk to our commanders at that point in time. So finally they did call in and they told us to get a group together and to go on down to the city. And then people that were in the guard with units from the city were also there as well, like the 258th and first the 258th and the 369th. And people just dropped what they were doing and showed up. You know, they didn't have to have any big invitation. They were horrified and wanted to help. And the whole area sent so many different things, a lot of trucks. There were 5-ton dumps, there were 40-ton dumps, there were a huge amount of workers, and people came from all over the country with like a food truck, and they were handing out free sandwiches and all this kind of stuff. We had a posse of massage therapists and physical therapists that came down and gave massages to the guys that had been working on the pit for the whole time. Yeah, it was really very helpful. Over on the west side of Manhattan, there's the Chelsea Piers along that side, and they had commandeered them to, one was, I think, for the morgue, one was for the families, and one was, or a bunch of kiosks were like everything from staples for the paper that we were going to need and the communications, because they knocked out there was some towers up on the towers, you know, some cell towers on the towers. So, and then some for each of the different military branches and the cops and the firemen. And so everybody could get to each other in a very small period of time. And then we had badges that had numbers on it that allowed you to go into whichever area you needed to go. So I was there, I guess, the first night, and it was really it was spooky almost, because we came through the toll booths, and obviously you're in the military because you're wearing the clothes and have the ID card, and they let you through. And then we went up to the armory. I think it was the 7th Group Armory. It was on 5th Avenue, I think. And so there were some other people that had gotten into the city, and they were saying, so somebody said, do you want to go down and take a look? I said, yeah, I want to see what we're dealing with. And so I went down with a couple of other officers. And I think the thing that struck me the most, and the thing that I still remember besides the people, were the smell. It was like a combination of JP8, which is jet fuel, and organic matter from people and construction debris. And as we traveled down to get to the site, there was this one hospital, I think it was St. Francis, but I'm not sure, on the left-hand side, the east side, and they had probably 20 stretchers with 80 people waiting for casualties to come in that they could take to the operating room or the x-ray or the emergency room. And they were all just standing there because there were so very few people that were alive, even injured. Most of them were just dead.
Well, and I think you told me, because the leaders were at PEC for this leadership conference, that you were the highest ranking officer.
That's what they told me. So
Did that, I guess, the scene you just painted, I can imagine as a medical professional that is, definitely going to test you and to But did you feel like your leadership, the flip side of being an officer, as a medical officer, being an officer, being a leader, were your leadership abilities tested in that environment? Was that a lot of responsibility?
I think so, but we had such good leadership that were still in New York State, and our leadership that was in um, Arkansas was communicating with them, not by cell phone but by landlines and by some of the old military, kind of looked like Maxwell Smart boots. Um, and we we had had some experience just testing or preparing for a mass casualty. I only did it for the medical portion, but the other portions of the mass casualty were also tested, like personnel. Personnel had to do with getting orders and getting all sorts of different things that personnelists do, and then the foreshop. They were in charge, I think, of the morgue, and then how do you feed all these? Logistics was huge, but I tell you the the restaurants in New York, you walked in, if you were in uniform, your money was no good there. They just fed us. So it was really quite amazing. But then as more time went by and more plans were hatched, it was a much more robust and much more planned or solid plan to take care of folks. So.
And how long was the National Guard present in New York after 9/11, and what did that response start to look like in time?
Um, I think there was some portion of us there, and I may not know all of the portions that there were, but I think for several months. And as time went by, the mission, what it looked like, changed. There were civilians walking around with pictures of their loved ones saying, "Has anybody seen this person?" It was so sad. And then they started, I don't know if you saw any of them, they had wire fences that were meant to be barriers, but they had the pictures of their loved ones on that wall. It was just really sad. Um, and at first when we got down there, I mean, New York was like a different place. You hear about New York being sort of a crusty old city with snobs and people that are going to jump you, and never the twain shall meet. But people were buying bottles of water and handing us bottles of water on our trucks when we were drive by, and telling us thank you and God loves you, and they were really very grateful. And I think they were too somewhat scared and shell shocked at the point that we were talking about. We had a lot of dignitaries that came to visit. President Bush was there. The mayor came down. There were all sorts of people that wanted to know what had really happened. And at that point, we knew some of what had happened, but we didn't know as much as we know today. But again, that was a time when kids that had been in the Guard for purposes of getting money to go to college or to buy new loafers or something were sorely tested, because then they were down. It was a much bigger crime scene and much more horrific than Flight 800, perhaps. And this wasn't the first attack on the World Trade Center. This was actually the second attack. I was not involved at all with the first attack at all, but there were some people that were involved in both. So it was quite something. Quite something.
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking about the term you used earlier, the 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year, and how it kind of wound up not being that. And I think it'd be an understatement to say that this is a turning point in, you know, your career and the career of many people in the Guard and Reserve at this point in time. But
I think that's fair to say.
yeah.
I don't know how it influenced recruitment and retention, because that's always a big emphasis, because you can't really do the mission if you don't have the people to do it. But there were quite a few people that were older, like even in their 40s and their 50s. We had an ophthalmologist that was 72, and they decided, I can do my part. I'm going to go join the Guard, or I'm going to go join the Army. And they did. We had a lot of people that came down. Some people came down because their children, either sons or daughters, were in the military, and they felt like they would be in danger, so they wanted to be with them, at least in spirit. So, and there were people with amazing talents that came down and shared those talents and made life easier. So,
Well, what do you feel like, what did your career look like post 9/11, and thinking of this as kind of a turning point?
my career in the civilian world didn't really change. I was still doing OB and GYN, and both in the hospital and in my office. Um, my military career, when we came back from 9/11 missions, because after the initial 9/11, we had people going out and guarding the subways or guarding the airports or being a presence so that they would deter any more foolishness. So, but then I would say probably, well, in 19, let's see, no, it must have been 2004, I think it was. We were notified, no, it was 2003, we were notified that we were going to be going to Bosnia. I guess Bosnia and Herzegovina were having difficulties. And then about some time later, not very long later, the commander came in and said, we're not going to be going to Bosnia, we're going to Iraq. And we're like, Iraq? And so, long story short, that was in 2003. 2004, they did what they call PDSS, or a pre-deployment site survey, where they send over some leadership and some people that know what they're going to be needing and see how much the people that were already there could leave them and how much what we would need to get whatever else we needed. So we did that, and then we went over to start the actual mission, not the people that were already there, but I think we were there in January of 2005, I believe, is when we were there. And we did our pre-deployment training at Fort Drum, New York. And so, and because back then, I mean, the National Guard was sort of an afterthought, really, to a lot of people, including the people with the purse strings. And so we weren't very well supplied with things that we needed, everything from computers to toilet paper. We weren't very well manned in the personnel sections, and we weren't very well educated on what our real mission would be. And we had all that to do in a 6 or 7 month period. And so they worked very hard to get us ready. And they sent over, I think, a force that was a whole lot different than the force that had first come to Fort Drum. So anyway, we got to there, and we were in Iraq for all of 2005, and then people different people were there a couple more weeks or a couple more days or whatever, but most everybody was out by Christmas time in 2005. We came back to Drum, we out-processed there and went back home. And I think the people that had been physically injured, they did a very good job of getting them to Landstuhl, which is in Germany, which was like the big triage center, and then sent over to the United States to wherever they had what they were going to be needing, primarily at Walter Reed. And I think that was before they changed Walter Reed to combine with Bethesda and have it be in Bethesda. I think they were still up on Peach Avenue in this district. And then there were all sorts of people that had become involved in something that was also very tragic, which was we had a commander of a headquarters unit and his XO. The XO had only been in country 4 days, and they had been playing some game in the commander's hooch, which was in the Water Palace. And all of a sudden there was an explosion. So anyway, I'd been in talking to the chief, and one of the runners from the little head shed there, came in and said, "We just took what we think is indirect fire." Where? The water palace. Thinking, because in order to get something to blow up the water palace, you had to go up a ravine, down a ravine, you had to go hills, and we just didn't have those kind of munitions. And so I'm like, I think we better go see about that. And I said, was anybody hurt? And they said, yeah, there's 2 guys that were there in the hooch, and they're hurt. Well, where are they? They're in the medical section. Okay, so go over there. And they were both really critically injured. One was pretty clear that he was not going to live, but you never know. Stranger things have happened. And the other one looked okay, but he had an awful lot of damage. And so in the middle of all this, we were in the middle of a haboob, one of the big, big sandstorms. And so air couldn't fly. We were going to ask for an airship to come from Spiker, which was about 10 clicks away, come pick them up and then put them down in the level 2 care, because we were like level 1.5. We didn't have very much to sustain him. He was going to need surgery. They both were going to need surgery. So anyway, they said, well, no, we can't get you over there in the air. I said, okay, well, round me up some trucks and we'll drive over in the dark through Iraq. So I said, now nobody has to go, but and everybody wanted to go. So they were like, no, we'll go. So, and the up armor that they had was not factory applied. It was just kind of, they called them Haji applied up armor, which was not stopping much of anything really. But we got there without any trouble at all. We didn't get stopped. We didn't get shot at. We didn't get messed with. And then when we got there, the company commander, Phil Esposito, he was worse off than his XO, and he dropped his pulse and his respirations very shortly after we got there, probably within a half an hour. And so they pronounced him dead, and I'm thinking, if Esposito is Italian, and Italians are usually Catholic, I bet we ought to do some kind of last rites. And so I said to him, can you get me a chaplain? They said, well, we could, except the chaplain is out on another base and can't get back because of the sandstorm. I thought, well, I guess that leaves me. And so I said, some prayers over him and asked God to bless him and take him. And I said, if this isn't exactly right, it's because I'm not a chaplain, God, and I know you know that. But so that was my first chaplainly duty. So then I went to the operating room with the XO, and he had really more severe injuries internally than he did externally. And he lost his pulse 2 or 3 times, but they got him back. They shocked him, got him back. But then the last time he dropped it, they couldn't get him back, and he was declared. So I called and he had 4 kids under the age of 6. So between the 2 of them, they had 5 kids under the age of 6, because the commander's little girl was only 18 months. So called the chief and I said, you need to come get somebody to come take us back. And they said, no, we can't, Doc. We'll do that tomorrow. And I said, what about tonight? And they said, no. I said, we got here. Surely we can get back. And they said, no, now the Iraqis know that you have something over in Spiker. They're going to expect you to come back, and they're going to be ready. So no, we'll come by first thing in the morning and get you in the air. I was not happy. So, but the people that were the host party on the hospital at Spiker were very kind, very generous. And so, and then after Iraq, we came back and just kind of decompressed and trained some more. And in 2008, we went back to Afghanistan. So,
and during this time, you told me in 2008, the kind of behind the scenes of this incident with these 2 officers was being investigated. Do you mind talking a little bit about?
Nope. I don't know a lot about what the investigation entailed, I knew I was going to be called as a witness because I was witness to the attack, not to the attack, but to the effects of the attack and their deaths. So I don't really know. Probably one of the JAG officers would know a lot more about what the events entailed. I know that one of the widows, Mrs. Allen, who was the XO's wife, she's actually now written 2 books about this, because I think everybody was sort of devastated that this guy was found not guilty, in the trial.
So to back up, because I don't think
we didn't get to that part.
said it. Yeah,
Okay.
you mentioned that it was initially thought to be a direct fire, but that it was kind of weird because of the ravines.
Right. So then somebody from the Navy, I think that was an EOD, went and looked at it and said, "That's the array that you see with a Claymore mine. This guy had been mined." And so they somehow they investigated and figured out that the mine had been set in the window. And then they had a couple of other charges along the way that they set off as well. And I don't know how they came upon accusing Sergeant Martinez, but they did. I think there had been some interactions between him and the company commander, and allegedly the company commander was going to prefer charges and basically ask him to seek his dreams elsewhere. And so he was placed in pretrial confinement, first over in Iraq and then in North Carolina at the Lejeune, I think it was, had pretrial confinement quarters for him. And then, so 4 years later, so pretty much for 4 years, I didn't really know a whole lot about what was going on with that. I just knew that at some point in time, I'd be asked to testify, but that's really all I knew. The next probably big thing was that we then got told we were going to Afghanistan because they were having troubles over there. And so we were part of a task force that was like the lead task force, was the 27th Brigade in Syracuse. And it was similar in that it was a similar mission. We would be landowners. There would be times when we would be on patrol and potentially have things shot at us or whatever. We were housed in Saddam Hussein's palace, the main headquarters was. And no, that was in Iraq. Take that back. For Afghanistan, we were housed in the main leadership was in basically connexes that had air conditioning in it, and they had a shower in it. It was like we're living large, so we were there for probably past February of the next year. We were there. Makes you feel very humble for made me feel very humble for what we have back here. I think at the time that we were in Iraq, my understanding was that there was one CAT scan for the entire country.
Wow.
I don't think they had anybody that knew how to run it or fix it or read it or act on the findings, but...
And I think you also told me that the communication, the broadband in Afghanistan was improved.
It was better than, at least from our standpoint, we had enough access to do some of the things that we needed to do. We went to an electronic medical record, which was great because then the soldiers could just pick that up off the computer and bring it to whoever they were going to go see when they checked out.
Do you think some of this was because of the difference in time frame? Because this is a couple of years later, is this difference in the nature of the conflicts? I mean,
I always sort of assumed that it was based on the time frame. You had 3 more years to get it together, and electronics was really a big deal during that time, I think. And it seemed to me that Iraq had an infrastructure. At that time, it was pretty corrupt, but they did have an infrastructure. I didn't see any sign of any infrastructure in Afghanistan at all. None. They did have a hospital there. I think I told you about the time that they called medical. Some of our guys called our outfit to come retrieve a VBIED driver. And we're like, once they're dead, we're not doing anything for them. You know, that then they go to logistics to the mortuary, but they're not even American soldiers, so they would go back to their own people.
VBIED is vehicle-borne IED?
Correct. Yeah, it's where they take a car and they load it full of explosives. And so you always want to watch out for cars that sit really low to the ground.
So why did they call you to retrieve them?
Because they were, the upper portion of the driver's body was on a sunscreen hanging over the soldier's head, literally. So my sergeant climbed up and I climbed up, and he managed to get the torso off there. And then, okay, now what do we do with it? And so he had a contact in the hospital. And so it was like, we need to get this guy back to you. And so they had already had one guy that had been similar in a previously exploded BBIED, and they got him back to the hospital, and they came to our gate and picked him up. So he was gone. But the second guy, nobody would take him. And so we were driving around. Sergeant Haggerty was driving around with this dead half a body in his truck. It was an army truck, beta truck. And we kept having to go get ice from the people that make the ice. And finally, Jimmy worked his sergeant's magic, and you know how it is. He was great. He deserves a mention, I tell you. He would be another one that would be, except he's all the way in New York. Although he might be down in Florida. I don't know. I'll take your number and let you know if he's... Are you only doing this in Florida, or are you doing it?
We focus on Florida.
Florida, okay. Because he oftentimes come down here in the summer, in the wintertime.
If he...
Yeah.
We could possibly work something out. That would be cool. But I do want to talk about you right now.
Okay.
So.
Back to me. It's all about me.
That doesn't sound like a typical day.
No, it wasn't a typical day. A typical day was we'd get up, and we tended to do our PT early in the morning because it was cooler then than in the afternoon or the nighttime. And then we'd take a shower, go to breakfast, come back, catch up on paperwork from the night before that we didn't do. And then sometimes there were briefings, sometimes there were visits from dignitaries, sometimes there were classes. One of the things that General Toludo supported, I guess you would say, was that the Army said every 10th soldier should be trained in basically first aid, combat lifesaver, it was called. But I said, do you guys want to chance, having only 1 in 10 chance that combat lifesaver is going to be sitting next to you? So they quickly saw the light and said, we're going to have every person taking combat lifesaver. So we did a lot of training. And we trained the Iraqis, special forces in that too. That was great fun. And they didn't speak any English, or so they said, and we didn't speak any of their language either. So it was sort of a course by show and tell, and they were really bright, very good, and they picked it up right way. So
it's cool, kind of inner
yeah.
partnership. This is something I really want to get to, because it's I found very funny when we were talking on the phone, and you said you had been in school in Tennessee. And so you kind of became the translator,
right?
For the Tennessee Guard.
No, we were over in Iraq, and we had several brigades, which is the next level down from a division, and 2 of them were Cav units. They were Cav regiments. One was from Idaho, and one was from Tennessee. And I had been in school in Tennessee for medical school, and I had also taught there at the university. And so I'd spent about 15, 20 years in Tennessee. There were a couple of people from the big cities, like either Memphis or Nashville or Knoxville. Those were the big cities. Johnson City, sort of. But everybody else had a very strong Tennessee twang. And so the regimental commander of the 278th was a guy named Dennis Adams. And I know he went to UT, and I think he played football, and I think he was on the O-line because he was big. I mean, he was not going to be a wide receiver. So anyway, after a while, this one day he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Doc." I said, "Hey, what?" And he says, "I put you in for TERP fees," which is interpreter fees. You know, you get an extra bonus if you're an interpreter, can be bilingual. I said, "Really? Why is that?" And he said, "Because you're the only person that can understand us boys from Tennessee." And I said, "Okay, great." They were very funny, though. They were very funny. So, and their reports were always amusing to read because they wrote up their reports just like they talked. Just exactly how they talked. But they did a good job. And Colonel Adams, they were down in eastern Diyala province, which was down south a bit and over to the east. And so that's where their group was on 3 different FOBs. And so he had convinced the mayor of this little town called Tuz, T-U-Z, that he should paint a big orange T on their water tower. And so, but he didn't say anything about it. And so this one day, the General Toledo and I can't remember who else was there with us, but anyway, we're flying into their outfit, and I'm looking at the water tower, and so I thought, okay. So anyway, I found Dennis and I said, "Tell me about your water tower." And he goes, "Oh man, don't you think it's good?" And I said, "I do think it's good." He said, "I convinced the mayor that he should put a big T up there for Tuz." Of course, it was for Tennessee, really. But I think they absolutely loved him. I think he could have run for mayor and been elected. He was, for some reason, this great big hulky guy that weighed probably as much as 3 of those scrawny little Iraqis. They just loved him. So, and we had some visitors at them because of their background, I guess. Charlie Daniels came to visit. Toby Keith came to visit. Yeah, so it was great. And both of them, they were so kind to the soldiers. You know, they'd sign anything. You could take pictures. One of them tried to hustle Toby Keith along, and he said, "I've got soldiers waiting here. You're just going to have to go back to your chopper and wait."
Wow, that's really cool.
It was cool.
Yeah. So after Afghanistan, you were state surgeon in New York.
Mm-hmm.
After you got back from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What kind of how did it feel to step into that kind of role, that kind of leadership role? And you could clearly get a lot of experience by this point. What did that role entail, and how did that feel for you?
It entailed a number of different things. Anything post-war or conflict or whatever you want to call it is always a great opportunity for learning and trying to protect yourselves and your soldiers for the next event that comes along. I think one of the things I felt like was that everybody, not only leadership but soldiers as well, felt a new appreciation or evaluation of medical. They said, we could go 2 days without a meal, but if we went 2 days without medics when we really needed them, you wouldn't need them after that because they'd be dead. So I found that different things annoyed me. I was taking care of this one patient, and I resigned from the clinical practice in 2011, so it was a year or 2 after I came back. But some lady was whining about, I don't know, something. And I thought, there are bigger things in the world to worry about than your stub your toe or whatever it was. And so, but I never said it. But I thought, oh, it's time for me to leave this practice because I'm going to get resentful. And, but I appreciated the importance of the support from home, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. My sister, God love her, She was the chairman of a phys ed department and loved to have a project to organize. So she organized everybody in my family to send me packages. She sent out a calendar and said, sign up on which week you want to send Joni a package. So she did, and I was getting packaged, and there were great creative packages. And this one was from my aunt in Texas, and it was the best package of all. It had really good, soft toilet paper. It was great. But then I called Barbara. I said, don't ask the little old ladies and these were my dad's sisters. My dad was the youngest of 9. So I said, they're on fixed incomes. Leave them alone. No, they want to. No, they don't. Just leave them alone. But one of the best packages I got was it in Afghanistan or Iraq? I think it was in Iraq. And they sent a package with a bunch of, goodies and pokey bait, but it had in it 3 cameras that you could set up on a computer, and then the person that was looking at the computer, their image would be projected back to whoever they had called. So families could actually see that their person was still alive, was okay, could talk, could think, or had big troubles or whatever. And so we sent them downrange to farther away from the flagpole because that's where they needed them. But that really made a big difference to the families and the soldiers.
I imagine.
Because while we were well trained for what we were doing, the families aren't as well trained or weren't as well trained back then on how to be a family waiting for somebody. So
can you elaborate on that? That's a really interesting point. What?
Part of it, I guess part of their response depends on what their relationship was before the deployment, how well prepared they were overall. Like, did they have other people did they have a battle buddy? Some of it was how many other assets they had in their life that they could depend on, whether it be a personal asset, a good neighbor, or a church, or a Girl Scout leader for a troop. So there were lots of different variables. But one of the things that we did after both Iraq and Afghanistan was have what they called yellow ribbon meetings. And they were post-deployment meetings when everybody was back. And they had them at a place far away. Like one of the ones I went to was up in a resort in upstate New York. So you didn't have the distraction of, home phones and mail and all that stuff. It lasted a couple of days. And we talked with the families and see what was important to them. And so they helped us prepare for the next time or prepare them for the next time. So
Interesting. Yeah, that family experience. I imagine just the waiting would be tough. And not knowing.
Particularly when they feel like they can't do anything, they're helpless to do something, or they don't know what to do, or because part of it that's hard on them, I think, too, is that there was a lot of knowledge that they weren't going to be able to have just because it was secret or top secret, or would jeopardize the mission if they knew. So,
and this is just drawing a parallel in my mind. I'm just thinking about, the flip side of that. You said something the other day that stuck with me about a soldier who was injured and, of course, wanted to go home, but then didn't want to go home because the rest of his team wasn't coming home.
Absolutely. And I saw that all the time.
Yeah.
We had this one guy that was having a cigarette right outside my office building door by the, I think they were by the latrines. And they took indirect fire. I don't know if it was a rocket or a mortar, and it didn't hit him. It hit the gravel, I don't know, maybe 10 feet away from him, but with the shoot up of the gravel, it was like being shrapneled all over his body. And so, and he took terrible hits to his legs. And so he said, we were talking with him about him, seeing what was going on and telling him what was going to happen to him. And we told him we'd get him loaded up and we'd going to fly him over to Spiker where they have more capability to take care of him. And he said, Doc, he figured out that I was the ranking officer because I was the colonel there. So he figured he'd go right to the top and get this approved. He said, I got to get out of here tonight. I said, yeah, the chopper will be here in a couple of minutes. He said, no, I need to get out of the medical system tonight. Why? Because we've got River Watch tomorrow, and I am the lead sergeant on that. And this is a guy that one of his legs had been blown totally off right below the knee, and then one of them had been severely injured. And it was like, all he wants to do is just go take care of his buddies and do the mission. And he said, my leg will wait. I said, nah, I really won't. So they were a good group. I didn't feel like there was anybody that was trying to get out of there. You hear stories like Klinger. There weren't any Klingers there from MASH. Do you remember Klinger from MASH?
I've seen the show a few times.
Klinger was the one who dressed up as a woman because he was trying to get a Section 8 to go home. So we didn't have anybody like that. We all wanted to go home, but we all wanted us all to go home. We didn't want to go home piecemeal. So it was good. What else?
Well, we can kind of move toward wrapping up a little bit.
Okay.
I'm going to ask some sort of I guess kind of some overall reflective questions. So you retired in 2014, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm right. Okay.
August 31st.
August 31st. So that's interesting. You remember the exact date? Right off the top of your head.
Oh, I had it planned out. Yep.
Yeah.
And I had tried to retire before. I kept dropping my retirement papers, and they'd come back a couple days later and say, congratulations, Doc, they approved you for 2 more years. And I said, I didn't ask to be approved for 2 more years. I asked to be retired forever.
Well, how did it feel when this delayed retirement finally took place? I mean, you've been in the military since 1977. How did it feel to hang up that uniform, that chapter, if you like?
Right. It definitely, there was some things that I really missed about it, primarily the people and the relationships that I made. Because I think when you make a relationship with somebody and you do something really stressful, really different, whether it be going to medical school together or having to sing a solo in front of whoever, or going to war and getting nearly killed, you make a relationship primarily with your battle buddy that's unlike any. I mean, my battle buddy called me this morning. And I hear from him every week. We talk every week. And when we were at the Syracuse going away party when we were going to Afghanistan, and I had known this guy like you do in the Guard, you know the people in your geographic area, and I'd known him for 20-something years. I delivered his son, and so I knew his wife too. So anyway, I was talking with her, and she sees him walk by, and she says, Gary. And he says, yeah. He says, can you come here for a minute? So he comes over, and she says, now you're going to Afghanistan. He said, yes, Cindy, I know. And he said, and you're going with Doc. Yeah, I know. And so Cindy says, well, while y'all are over there, she's the boss of you. And I said, oh, yes. And he was the deputy commander, so I had to remind him about that a couple times.
That's funny. Well, I mean, it sounds like his wife put you in charge.
Oh, yeah.
That's what wins out, right?
Yeah. But anyway, there were changes. And one time, my family from upstate New York was going to meet my sister on Long Island, and we're going to go down to New Jersey to a family event. And so, but we were picking up a car that somebody had given to my sister's daughter, and we were going to deliver that to her. And so we did that, and we were on the Long Island Expressway in a traffic jam, and I got really nervous because I felt like I was back in Iraq again, or Afghanistan, in a trap. I couldn't move fast enough to get out of the way if somebody was going to lob something at me in a kill zone, even though I knew cognitively that I was in New Jersey. So it was just different. And then when you first come back, I think everybody comes back with a piece of PTSD, whether it's major, whether it's minor, whether it's something you keep to yourself. But everybody has their thing. And one of the things that I did not like was, even though I recognized that their intentions were good, people would say, well, tell me about the war. And this was somebody that was not military, hadn't even had a big fight with their spouse. It was they just wanted to know what it was like. I said, well, it made me feel all the more grateful for what I have here. But I thought, you don't know. I'm not talking to you.
Yeah. You're part of veterans organizations. Today, you're in the Women's Veterans Organization shirt, the Tri-County Women's Veterans.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience with veterans organizations today?
I will. I would say that there weren't a lot of organizations that I was a part of back in New York, that I recall anyway. Once we came here, my brother actually found the Women Veterans Organization. He said, oh, you should go to this. It's on Monday. So we went, and there were 8 members, and we're now up over 350 members. So it's really taken off. We're now a 50c3, and so we can get contributions and then distribute them out to other organizations that need it. And they're really there's no like elitist or there's no officers here and corpsmen or NCOs there and enlisted down there. It's just we're all soldiers, or we were Navy men, or we were Zoomies, or whatever we were. So there's always a competition between Army and Navy and Air Force, and Marines kind of just say, we're better than y'all anyway. So, but it's actually a sisterhood. It's kind of like the band of sisters as opposed to the band of brothers. It's very accepting. We paid money to have a house built. We bought the land and then had the house built that was 100% handicapped accessible for this lady that was in the regular Army, and she was in an accident. I think they were sling loading something, and it came off whatever aircraft was sling loading it and caught her right about here. And so she's paralyzed I think she has a little bit of movement from her left arm, but she was over near the Tampa area, and it wasn't very easy to get around as a person in a wheelchair. And so anyway, and she came to the villages for some reason, I don't really know why, and she just loved it. So we thought, well, we can fix this. So we bought the land and then raised the money and bought the house, and she's now in the house. So, and we have a soldier that has fairly significant PTSD, some headaches, some other issues, and we got her a dog, one of the service dogs.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and those service dogs, they cost about $30,000. They're really expensive, but they work wonders. They really do. So that's been a soft place to land, and everybody there sort of has a lot of the same values, but an entirely different set of circumstances usually. And we have we have a chaplain who's great. She's hilarious, and she was in Afghanistan, and she was in the Ohio State marching band, and she's a music major, plus theology, but it's an interesting combination. And then we have people that were intel specialists, and we have people that were nurses, and we have people that were part of the first wave of computers in the military. Yeah, we had are you familiar with Honor Flight? Okay. We had the first all-female Honor Flight leave from Florida. There was one out of Chicago too, I think, before that, but they weren't all from Chicago. These were all from here. And we went up to Washington, D.C. to see the monuments, and it was awesome.
Yeah, and just for the cameras, that's the program, correct me if I'm saying it wrong, that's the program that flies veterans to D.C., shows them around the monuments. And
correct. And gives them the welcome and the honors that they really deserve that a lot of them never got. On our flight, we had a World War II veteran. Her name was Ruth Jones, and she was an OR assistant or OR tech in World War II. I don't know whether she was here in CONUS or whether she was overseas, but she was World War II. And she was like the rock star of the whole group. And everybody wanted to talk to her, and she was just as bright and as clear and happy, and she just loved it. She especially loved, we had some Marines that put on a silent drill team for us.
Cool.
It was very cool. And after they were finished, they all kind of rushed over to Ruth and wanted to know, how she was doing. And so it was just a great experience. And if you ever get to be either a veteran or staff or a guardian, and you don't have to be military to be a guardian on a flight, you can just go to honorflight.org and then go to Villages Honor Flight or wherever you're going to be living. And it has applications, and you can be either a veteran or a guardian or staff. Just, you could be the staff photographer. We did have, Chris Lip was ours, and he put together, I'll find the site on the computer and send it to you, but he took all our pictures, both stills and video, and put together a book for us. It's awesome.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, if there was one, I guess, message you would impart or piece of advice you would give to maybe a young person or a young woman in particular, since you're talking about the fantastic work this Tri-County Women's Veterans Organization and the sisterhood in that, one piece of advice or one kind of reflection you would offer to a young person or a young woman in particular, what's something you would tell somebody? Is somebody considering joining the military, or maybe not considering joining the military, considering what to do with their life, their next step? What's something that you would offer?
I think I would say be humble for what you have, because not everybody has it. The people you hear complaining in the grocery store about, whatever about the military, in other countries, they would be beheaded, and that would be the end of that. Almost everybody I can even think of has something to contribute. And so you can still do what you love and do it in the military and show other military members how much your love is important too. So it's, and not everybody serves in the uniform, but you can serve as people that get involved. Like we have ambassadors in our group, and they're not military, but they are people that support us and help set up a stage or help do whatever. So any skill you have or any love you have would be welcome and would be kind of a tribute to you and to your family. So
great. Is there anything in this interview that we've not covered that you would like to touch on?
I don't think so. There was one other thing, I guess, that didn't really affect me, but a lot of the women in our group felt like when they were in the service, they weren't appreciated. There was a book in fact, it was by Hannah, whoever, called The Women, and the protagonist in that book was a young lady who entered the military because her brother had gone into the military. Her brother died shortly after, not even before she came out of boot camp, but she still stayed in. And the message to her was that we didn't have women in Vietnam. Well, yeah, you did. So I think in years past, women haven't been as much appreciated as they are now for what they've done. I don't know whether it was different for me because I just expected them to respect me, or whether it was like the chief one time somebody said, "Chief, how come you never pick on the doc?" And I said, "Because I'm always right." And so everybody laughed, and he said, "Well, it's that, but also, hell, she might be doing my physical next month. I have to be good to her." It's like, okay. So, but I think there are now women 4-star generals. There are now women in almost every, the CNO, I think it was the CNO, the Chief Naval Officer of the Navy, I think was just relieved, but I think she was a female as well. So females are having more opportunities. They no longer say, no, you can't go to combat. They just are happy to have them there to take care of their fellow soldiers. So you can do it.
Well, that's fantastic. I really enjoyed this interview.
Yeah, I did too. Thanks.
Learned a lot, and really enjoyed hearing your stories. And so thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for my presence.
Yeah. Absolutely.